Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Today is Friday, February 5th. I'm Donna Will, Professional Development Coordinator for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to the Value-Based Payments session. Today, before we begin, I'm going to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There's a handout in the handout section in the panel to your right, and they can also be emailed to you. We will be recording this webinar. Questions can be typed in the question box, and we'll probably get those towards the end of the presentation. So I'm going to introduce Patricia Sestoki, Director of Programs. Good morning.
Good morning, Donna, and thank you so much. I'm very excited. I know that all of you who are joining us today are excited to hear about value-based payments. Those of you who send me emails for the last 6 months about wanting to hear about value-based payments, wanting to engage with the state, wanting to make sure we know where we're going, we wanted to open this up to everyone who's doing Meaningful Day. But we are going to be developing a specific workbook to talk and work with about value-based payments. So I want everybody to get the lay of the land, know where we are today, know where we're going in the future, and how we're going to work on this together. We have in front of you on the slide pretty much what we're going to be doing today in the hour and a half. We're going to talk about who we are, who's here with us today, and a review of what to expect in the next 18 months. And then we've invited the National Association of State Development Disabilities directors to help us and present. And you see there, Teja and Mary Sowers, who's joining us. But I also wanted to let you know, and Reed, thank you, Reed. I also wanted to let you know, this is really a big step for Maryland. This is a huge discussion that we're not taking lightly. This is something that our Deputy Secretary, Bernard Simons, as you know, he's a visionary. He's thinking of how we can get better at doing what we are doing and looking at how do we make sure we're meeting outcomes and the needs of people with developmental disabilities. So I would like to introduce to you our Deputy Secretary, Bernard Simons. Next slide,
Good morning.
please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to thank everybody for your interest on being on this webinar today for value-based payment. But before we get started, I want to thank the Montgomery County providers who got together and proposed this for our consideration at DDA. And we want to move in this direction. But, you know, as anything else, we've got a lot of other things going on at the same time. And there's a lot of work to be done, and I want to make sure that when we move in this direction that we get it right. We can't afford to have any missteps. And so because of that, I'm in really no great rush to move in this direction, and I want to take the opportunity to include this in our waiver renewals that we'll be doing within the next 15 months or so. I have asked the NASD team to assist us because many of you are familiar with NASD, the State DD Directors Association, that they really have their finger on the pulse of all of the states and what's going on and what's happening across the country. And maybe we can learn from other states where they implemented something and didn't think of something 100% through, or whatever, and then had a backpedal. And I don't want to do that. I want to make sure when we do this right, and make sure that we don't have to, again, backpedal and say, oh, we thought we were doing this, we thought we got it right, and we didn't get the right payments out to individuals for the supports that they were providing to people. So today we're going to kick this off as an overview, and then create an advisory group that Patricia and Kathleen will be talking about later. And we want to ensure that we've got representatives from a diverse group of providers so that we've got equity across our system and looking at proposed funding changes, et cetera. And with that, I want to thank the NASD team who's joining us today. I want to thank Mary, who many of you know. She used to work at DDA years ago before she went out and ventured off into CMS and other opportunities, and now is the executive director for a good period of time. And then many of you are familiar with Ree Kennedy Lazat. We've had a lot of meetings around employment with UMass Boston ICI, with John Butterworth and Ree, and she's a wealth of knowledge. And then a new member to the NASTY team is Taya Stokes, who's got a wealth of information and experience. So I'm really pleased that they're all here with us as we start looking forward with Maryland's value-based payment in this journey. So thank you for being here.
So thank you so much, Bernie, for those words. And I cannot say and express what a great opportunity has been working with the NASTY team. I mean, you have been fantastic. Ree, we've been working together now for the last 5 years in the SLM projects, and you've been talking to our providers about tier standards, about the employment, community employment integrated supports. So this is really a great opportunity, Ree. You have been fantastic. And Mary, with your leadership, I don't think we can do what we're doing. And Taya, it's been wonderful. We can't wait to hear all the wonderful things that you guys are learning from other states to share with us. So I really do thank you all for being here, as Bernie said. I wanted to have Kathleen give you an overview of the faces of what the team, and when I said the team right now, is talking to Mary, to Taya, to Ree, to Kathleen, to Bernie, as to how are we going to stage this for the next 6 months. And we wanted to give you the big 1,500-foot view of what we're looking at, so that you know that we're not going to make this decision tomorrow, or even 3 months or 6 months from now. So let's go ahead and go to slide 8, Donna.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to talk about the overview of the phases for our plan for the next 15 or so months, when we are going to be trying to implement such a big change in Maryland. So first, the first phase is really today. It starts today, the orientation to the value-based payments. And we wanted to invite all the providers of meaningful day services, including obviously the employment providers, coordinators of community services, self-advocates, and families to talk about value-based payments starting in this month. We also wanted to invite several states that have implemented the value-based payments and share with the group their experience in the following areas. We want to talk about rate methodology, what's working, are there lessons that were learned through the process of implementing value-based payments in several states, and implementation strategies and communication. And then, as discussed before, we go to phase 2. So DDA wants to work with an advisory group. This is going to be a working advisory group that the State Employment Leadership Network and the NASDI's team can share best practices with the group, and then facilitate several group discussions over the next several months, as well as the DDA having an internal team to review and operationalize those recommendations and the final decision from the DDA leadership team. So having those two working groups is really going to provide the capacity that we need to implement value-based payment in our state. Then we have phase 3. So phase 3 is really to learn from the other states that have implemented value-based payments, to really more focus on this. And that's where we really want to invite 3 to 4 states that are using this methodology to share those lessons learned and share unintended consequences, as well as implementation strategies. So we have the broad picture as well as a narrowed focus where we can really learn and kind of, take best practices from each state and make it our own. We also want to share with Maryland providers at that time that has been recommended, and have the opportunity to enhance or modify based on what we've learned from the best practices that we heard about in phase 1 and 2. So then we go to phase 4, and phase 4 is the final draft of recommendations. So the working advisory group would make a recommendation to the DDA on behalf of the state on value-based payments to the Deputy Secretary for his consideration and his final decision. So this is going to encompass all of the information and lessons learned and strategies, and really a final draft so that we can have a really great review and presentation. Then phase 5 would be the DDA's final approval and rollout plan, and then that would also include timeframes. So once a final approval has been made, it's going to be included in potentially the DDA renewal year. So we want to make sure that everyone is aware of the timeframes that goes along with that. So now I'm going to turn it over to the NASD's team. Patricia, would you like to get them started? Oh, actually, we already did that. So go ahead, Taya. I think this is you.
Hi, everyone. Just want to do a quick sound check. Kathleen, everything okay?
Yep, you sound fantastic.
Great, great. So hi, this is Taya Stokes from the NASD's team. And as has already been said, Mary Sowers and Reed Kennedy-Lazat are joining me today. We are so very excited that Maryland is exploring the notion of value-based payment to advance its goals for employment supports. We've had the opportunity to work with several states through the CMS Innovation Accelerator Program Initiative to think about and design value-based payment approaches. So a lot of what we have to share today comes from that work and the experience of those states. So I'm going to be taking the lead on walking through the presentation, but Mary and Ree, of course, can jump in here and there to add some of their pearls of wisdom. Next slide, please. Oh, no, stay on that one, overview. So here's what we have planned to ground you in value-based payments and exploring what a VBP strategy could do for Maryland. First, we want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say value-based payment and how we define pay for performance in home and community-based services. We have an example from Washington to provide a little bit of context for our conversation today. And then we want to walk through the roadmap for developing a VBP strategy in HCBS fee-for-service and where Maryland might want to start the VBP journey. So hope that sounds good to you. Next slide. So first we want to say, talk about what is VBP and why might it help advance your goals for employment supports. Next slide. We want to start with some definitions. Value-based payment is using incentives to hold service delivery entities accountable for the quality and cost of care. VBP is one type of alternative payment model, which is a strategy for moving away from simply paying for volume of services so that value is incentivized. Alternative payment models can be implemented in all types of Medicaid delivery systems, including fee-for-service and managed care. Next slide. CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has this handy-dandy graphic to show the levels of alternative payment models within a larger framework. So you start at the bottom floor where fee-for-service payments are made without any direct link to quality or efficiency. And then as you advance on the accountability scale, the next level has you connecting fee-for-service to quality and or efficiency so that at least a portion of payments are based on value. Then in the third step, you link some payment to effective management of a population segment or episode of care. Payments are still triggered at this level by some sort of service delivery, but here you have opportunities for shared savings or risk. And then finally, in the furthest stage to the right, you advance to the phase where payment isn't triggered by service and therefore volume, but it rather providers are paid for a person's care or service over a period of time, typically a year or more. And we've got some reference links here in the slides for you if you're interested in exploring further. Next slide. So this iteration of the framework provides some examples in each of the categories that we talked about. We're not going to spend a lot of time here, but what I do want to point out on this slide is that the VBP arrangements that we're talking about today generally fall into the second category. There are things like foundational payments, pay for performance, or pay for reporting in category 2, and we'll keep categories 3 and 4 for another day. Next slide. So I'm sure that we can all agree that the idea of being incentivized by payment isn't really new. I enjoyed getting allowance when I was a kid, being incentivized to do chores around the house. I'm sure several of you had the same experience. So, getting incentivized with money makes some sense. What's a more novel idea is using incentive payments in home and community-based services. So if you think about it, VBP is good because it promotes value by achieving goals. It helps to align or realign with what you're doing to achieve better coordination of care, again, moving away from just paying for volume. It promotes quality of care through the use of measures. We don't do it if we don't measure it. And then finally, it's, while not the primary purpose, but still important, incentive payments for value help to reduce cost by moving away from reliance on more expensive services such as hospital stays or congregate care. Next slide. So we know what and why now. Let's talk a few minutes about using value-based payments in the concept for home and community-based services. Next slide. So we want to do a few reminders about fee-for-service before we go any further. We know that home and community-based services are most often delivered in a fee-for-service system. Providers deliver a service, they get paid for it based on an established rate and a unit of service. So some examples are, using employment again as our lead idea here. Supported employment providers might, get reimbursed by the service hour. You might have personal care occur and be billed in increments of 15 or 30 minutes. You might have day support billed at half or full days. The rates paid in fee-for-service may be based on the actual cost of providing the service. It could be based on Medicare Economic Index, or it could be based on Medicaid-specific trend factors using state-determined inflation rates, like a cost of living adjustment. Next slide, please. But if you apply the concepts of pay for performance in home and community-based services, you have improvement aimed at quality, efficiency, and overall value of care. And there are a couple of value payment options that you can consider. Milestone payments occur when a milestone is achieved. So for example, a person completes their job discovery or has a career plan developed, and then the provider is rewarded because that milestone was achieved. You might have an outcome payment where the outcome is that you want the person to acquire a job, and when they achieve that job, the outcome is attained, and therefore the provider receives their incentive payment. You might have a quality-based incentive payment where you set a target, like for example, increase in percentage of individuals employed, and when that target is achieved or exceeded, then the payment is awarded to the provider. And then there are other criteria that you could establish as a state, for example, increasing individuals' wages or hours worked. So those are a couple of payment options that you can take into consideration. Next slide. So I like this slide because it's a nice snapshot summarizing how traditional fee-for-service compares to value-based payments. Again, as we said, fee-for-service really at the basic level, paying for straight-up service delivery. But on the flip side, pay for performance really focuses on achieving targets, incorporates within part of the payment good performance, encourages partnership in attaining goals. It's not just the state's goals, but it's a true partnership. And then keeping everyone, the state included, focusing on alignment of goals and then recognizing achievements. Next slide. So I thought it might be helpful for us to take all that we've talked about just now and look at it in the context of a developed and implemented value-based payment model. And Washington, because they have an employment focus, I thought would be a really good example to bring to Maryland today. Next slide, please. I had the really good fortune to be part of the IEP coaching team that worked with Washington on the value-based payment track a little over 2 years ago now. It might be getting closer to 3. My memory's a little foggy these days when it comes to timelines. But they knew from the very beginning that they needed to do something to improve employment for transition age students, especially those who had high support needs. They also knew that they weren't going to be successful without a strong partnership with the public school system to get students on the right path to employment. And then because Washington has and uses very rich data, they were laser focused on getting more students coming out of school with a job or opportunities to further their education. Next slide. Washington built its VBP model around some established framework for key transition milestones. The first in that framework is the job foundation phase, when students are 2 years from graduation. The second phase focuses on job development in the last year of school. And then the final phase is after graduation, when a student is working and receiving job supports. Next slide. So when using those 3 key touch points for a student in Washington, they set up milestone payments for providers to complete the job foundation process with students in the next to the last year in school. So they created a foundation, a milestone payment for achievement of that foundation goal, the job foundation goal of $2,400. It's pretty nice incentive payment. There are no incentive payments in the middle phase, but there are some crucial activities occurring for the job development process in partnership with vocational rehabilitation. And those are the catalysts to the incentive payments being offered in the jobs by June phase. And as you see here, the earlier a student is employed and supported in that job, the higher the value-based payment is for the provider. And then there's even a bonus payment if the provider is able to help the student get a job with more hours. So again, we think this is a great model and one to watch because Washington just launched it last year. Next slide. The other reason that we felt like Washington was a good example to bring for review today is because they used a specific roadmap to think about, design, and implement their VBP strategy. And so we want to take a closer look at that roadmap with you. Given the things that Kathleen talked about, we think this is really ideal for you to consider. Is someone trying to join the conversation? Mary or Reed, something that you wanted to say? I'm picking up some audio.
Not on this end.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you. Next slide, please. So there are 7 key steps in this roadmap, the value-based payment roadmap for home and community-based services. And we're going to break them down into greater detail on the coming slides, but I really wanted to spend a few minutes here on this overall snapshot. So it starts with knowing where you're going before you know how you get there. If you're planning a trip, you got to know your destination before you know whether you're going to drive or fly. So, you really, in thinking about a value-based payment, you've got to know what your policy objectives are and your aim statement right from the beginning. You also have to define how you're going to engage stakeholders, what you're going to measure, and using those measures to determine whether you've achieved your goals. And then you want to establish a baseline or the as is, so you know when an improvement is made and has been achieved. You also have to know how you'll measure performance, indicating that providers are eligible to receive the incentive. And then you also have to build the financial model for how those payments are derived. This is the stage then when you implement your VBP strategy, building on activities to monitor how your strategy is working out and then making adjustment as needed. So I want you to notice steps 1 through 6, all about design. We didn't talk about implementation at all up until stage 7. So, it's really focusing a lot on the upfront part on the design. Definitely a case where you build the plane before you actually fly it, even if it's a paper airplane. Ha ha ha, little attempted humor there for our graphic. So let's take a little closer look to understand why. Next slide, please. So like I said, you have to know where you're going before you know how you get there. And you have to ask yourself some basic questions to determine what those objectives are and what your overarching aim will be. You have to ask things like, what parts of our HCBS system are most in need of improvement? It sounds like you're focusing on employment right now, but there might be other opportunities that you want to consider. You want to also understand what priorities you have related to those changes that you want to make, those improvements. You want to think about what behavior you want to change the most and what areas of the system are most ripe for change. And then, thinking about what a realistic time frame is for achieving that vision. Next slide. I can't say it enough, and if I get the opportunity to come back and talk to you more, you'll hear me say it over and over and over again, that the stakeholder engagement strategy should be implemented throughout your entire process, from design to implementation. And the touch points for when you engage stakeholders may vary depending on those policy objectives and aim that you establish. In some cases, you might want your stakeholders with you from the very beginning, like it sounds like Maryland plans to do. They want to take the full VBP journey with you. But in other cases, it sometimes makes more sense to do engagement a little further into the design process, so that you have a chance to figure out some things as a state about your goals and what your baseline data may tell you. But in this part of the roadmap, it's really not a question of if, but it's a question of when and how often. You want your strategy, stakeholder engagement, to be comprehensive so that all aid partners and government leaders know what you're doing and why. You want individuals and families that may be affected by the strategy to understand how the improvement aims will ultimately result in good outcomes for them. And you want providers to feel that they have the ability to support people in an improved way, but also meeting their financial needs. Also, as a part of an engagement strategy, you want to think through where there might be some pushback and where people might not necessarily agree, and how you plan to address it. So there's some key things that you need to think about in that regard too. Next slide, please. There are a lot of questions that you have to answer when you think about a value-based payment measurement system. What performance is being measured? What are the eligibility criteria for participation? Within the measures, what will have the greatest impact on the program? What's realistic with regard to the data availability and even the cost of data collection? It's not cheap, and that's something that you also need to take into consideration. And then you want to think about what it will take to achieve buy-in from key stakeholders on the measures that are selected for being incentivized. Next slide. At this part of the roadmap, it's really important to know if you have the problem you think you have. And you do that by gathering and analyzing some data to create that baseline that I've already mentioned. You, at this stage, think about what data you need, what data is available. I'm not going to be able to measure it if you don't have it. And then you also have to think about what data systems you need to have in place in order to support your VBP strategy going forward. And then when doing the analysis, you have to understand whether or not your hypotheses play out about what to incentivize. So I always think at this stage, it's good to share one of the VBP states went through this process because anecdotally they thought they had a problem with ER visits. They were convinced that there was too many ER visits and they needed to address it. But then when they really started digging in, it turned out that the data just didn't hold up and there was no need to create a VBP strategy to address that. It wasn't a problem. So they were able to move on to something else. Next slide. I always say any great VBP design is just that, great design. If you don't have the funding available to support initially and ongoing, and we have another state who participated in the VBP's track that had a great design, but they weren't able to get it off the launch pad because they didn't have the money to support it. And even if you have the funding, some questions that you have to ask at this stage of the game as well about what it is you want to reward, how it aligns or doesn't with other programs and payment systems, and then the operations or process behind how you will make those payments and decide when the providers are ready to receive. Next slide. And then, of course, as a part of your design, you also have to include how you'll know when the providers have achieved outcomes you want to reward. I've mentioned that a couple of times already. And that includes what those measurements are. But you also have to have some basis for comparison. You have to think about factors that might influence performance. And then the resources to complete that measurement and adjudication process. So a lot of what we say, as we say here, devil's in the details. Next slide. So again, that was phase or steps 1 through 6, and there are a whole lot of things that have to happen before you get anywhere near implementation. And even when you do get to the stage of implementation, there are other considerations for knowing whether or not you have success and the steps you might need to take to really look at what the results are telling you. You might have to tweak your strategy. You'll need to get some feedback on how it's going. And then all of that information will then inform whether or not you decide if you have success that might lead you to changing your measures and then upping the game, so to speak, to incentivize something more or different. You should end performance will plateau at some point, and the goals that you set out to achieve through the incentive payments are achieved, and there's no point in continuing to pay for something that's on target. So if this is the opportunity to then look at it again and say, okay, what do we want now? What's the next phase, and what do we want to incentivize? So that's why you have to have that ability to do ongoing monitoring and refinement. It's fundamental to the long-term success of your VBP strategy. So I think you probably feel like that was a bit of a speed dating with VBP roadmap elements. A really nice summary here to think about. Pearls of wisdom within this particular slide, keeping your approach to the roadmap balanced. Got to start out with a strong foundation. Create front, make sure it's shared and that everybody and ready to take the journey together. I said it. I told you I was times. You cannot communicate enough. Communicate, communicate, communicate some more. Make sure everybody knows what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the direction you're headed. You want to select those measures that, yes, are important to your process, also realistic. Don't bite off more than you can chew. That data availability is going to drive the selection of your measures, so you really have to understand what that landscape is before you get going on what you're going to measure and then subsequently incentivize. Obviously, money can motivate change. And then you also want to make sure that what you choose to measure and report is simple, because it could create burden. And so, make sure that you don't bite off more, that you can wrap your arms around that tree. Lots of proverbial pearls of wisdom there. But the other thing to think about here is starting out small. You don't have to have this big, grandiose value-based payment strategy. It can be something little that you can try and test out and then build upon, comfortable with it, and have some success. And then, as I said, finally, making sure you're building in the opportunity to monitor and refine as you go, and that will really set you up for success in the long run. Next slide. So we've talked about what value-based payment is. We've talked about an example from Washington. We've walked through what it takes to design and implement a strategy. Great. Now what do we do? Next slide. You take the first step and you begin at the beginning. And you make sure that you know what you want to accomplish, how you know how you will know when change is an improvement. You want to make sure that you're learning as you go, and that you have the ability to know when success has been achieved and that you actually improved what you set out to improve. Next slide. As with any journey, there are potholes, lots of potholes. These are a few to be wary of. There are many more, and I think you can see that they're are embedded in some of those roadmap questions that you should be asking yourselves along the way. But again, starting out with that strong vision with a focus on milestones and requirements are important. Making sure that the data is easy to collect and easy to control. Again, don't bite off more than you can chew. And then making sure that you're not gathering too much information. That could also be a real detriment to your process. So making sure that you don't get lost in the weeds. Next slide, please. And as we said, it all starts with a good aim. So here's some tips for developing a really solid aim statement. You want to create an aim statement that's meaningful for everyone that's going to be involved in the process, a vision that resonates with everyone, where you have good buy-in and that people are inspired to take the journey with you, because it's not easy. It's a lot of hard work. And so you want to make sure everybody's engaged by having that strong vision to start with. You also want to make sure that your aim statement is measurable and time-bound, that you, as I said, have the data to support it, it exists, and that you have the ability to collect that information. And then the other thing that's really important to think about when creating your aim is that you're being ambitious. You're not taking the easy road. There are some parts of it that you want to be easy, but with your aim statement, be a little ambitious, be bold. Stick your neck out there a little bit. You don't want to choose something that has already been accomplished or is low-hanging fruit. This is your ability to stretch and really push to make some meaningful change. Next slide, please. So when you know your destination or your aim, there are some common tools like the driver diagram that you see here that can really go a long way to helping you determine how you're going to accomplish your aim. It helps to know what factors will directly influence the achievement of the aim, and those things, actions or interventions that impact the primary drivers. And we have some other tools related to the driver diagram that NASDs can provide and help support you with as well. Next slide. Washington's driver diagram is a great reference, and you can see that it nicely ties to what they ultimately designed and implemented. They really created a great aim, and I'll read it here for you because it is a little small, at least on my screen anyway. So they wanted to increase the average hours per week worked at least minimum wage for high acuity individuals by 50% by 2021, while maintaining the current growth rate in high acuity clients working at least minimum wage. So you'll see measurable and time bound. Back to our tips on good aim statements. They wanted to increase by 50%, which is their measure, by 2021, their time limit. And they also explored through the driver diagram those influencers, things that really impacted their ability to achieve the aim. They knew that they had to address a support for individual needs at the person-centered planning process, that they had to offer on-demand technical assistance for providers to really be able to work through supporting students throughout those phases and getting them ready for having a job by June. They also needed to increase flexibility for their county partners in the use of support hours. And then they also wanted to develop a value-based payment strategy focused on school or employment transition. So I want you to notice here The value-based payment strategy is in the far right column as a secondary driver. It is not the main thing related to achieving the aim. There are lots of other things, and value-based payment strategy is just one of those tools to achieve that aim. And then they had some key primary drivers that they also were able to identify. They knew that there was a need to improve the transitioning process for students with high acuity exiting the school system, and that they also had to address the needs of individuals around transportation, competing activities, and even family supports, so that they were better able to ensure that the individuals were able to achieve their work goals. Next slide. So last but not least, our advice to you is to develop an action plan. So you've got this great aim, you know you want to achieve some goals, but you've got to have an action plan in order to achieve the things that you lay out in the roadmap. And that you want to make sure that your goals and timelines are positive but possible, and really think about using all of the elements in the roadmap. It truly is that strategy that you can use to create the action plan to set yourself up for success. And we'll go to the next slide. So I'm sure you would have really preferred that I come here and say, oh, VBP is a piece of cake. Just pick your incentive amount and get started. You know, no worries. But I think you now understand that it's not that simple, and it's definitely not something you want to be in a hurry about. And as Bernie said at the very beginning, you want to make sure you're doing it right. And so there's some real value in taking your time. And the great thing about it is there is a process that has been established and some tools that you can use and lessons learned from states that have gone before you. So you have a lot to draw on in starting your journey. So let me open it up and see what questions you have.
So there's a couple of questions, and one of them is, what are the most common incentive categories? Hours worked, longevity, increased independence, increased natural supports?
This is a good time for Rhea and Mary to get in here. I'll start and then see if they have anything else to add. I would say that there isn't necessarily really anything that you would deem as common. It really is up to you and what you find is most important to achieve your state's goals. So any of those are things that you can use. You know, I think there are some that you might want to that might gravitate toward, but I don't know that I would pin anything as common. Mary or Reed, what do you think?
I'll jump in quickly, and thanks, Taya, for going over all of the pieces. I think what becomes immediately clear, especially in home and community-based services, is that it is truly a Swiss timepiece. And so going in very methodically and taking the process through its paces gives you the opportunity to really see the areas of influence on any particular aim. And so really applaud the state for beginning this journey. I think it's almost premature to say there's anything common in value-based payment in home and community-based services nationally. We have a few examples of things that have gotten off the ground, but most states are in a very similar spot as Maryland, where there's an interest and an intrigue, but there's that journey really does take some time, and often some precursor steps to, as Taya mentioned, there are often there's certainly always a need for data in value-based payments to make sure you have the mechanisms to know when success has occurred. And some states realize after identifying what they want to change that they might not have good eyes on those elements. So I'm almost a little bit hesitant to sort of paint any trends, because it's still very fledgling in home and community-based services writ large. But I think it's a really exciting time to think about paying for things different than volume to really improve the lives of individuals we support. But Reed, you probably have some other.
Oh, you guys have covered it really well, but it is true that we have had a great many states say they want to improve employment opportunities and outcomes through value-based payments. That's an interest across the country. How to achieve it is still really very at the very beginning, just as you are here in Maryland talking about it. And as Tay and Mary have shared already, there's an incredible amount of thought and work that needs to go into preparing to get to that real outcome that you want to achieve by incentivizing some part of your system to improve employment outcomes.
Great, thank you. Rhea, I have a question for you. How, if at all, can the measurable skills requirements under WIOA for VR be addressed for this population?
Can you repeat that again so I catch it carefully?
Sure. How, if at all, can the measurable skills requirements under WIOA for VR be addressed for this population?
I think I would answer that this way. If I'm understanding the question correctly, and whoever asked that question, if you want to jump in and clarify a little more after I share what I am believing you're asking. I think one of the challenges with the implementation of the Workforce Act, particularly around employment and the IDD population, is twofold. One, how do we help Voc Rehab through our collaboration with that agency to better do transition counseling with youth and young adults and their families while they're still in school. VR agencies were pressed to quickly come into compliance with implementation, and they did their due diligence in checking the boxes. And that is always the first phase of implementing major federal policy changes. So for VR agencies, they've geared up, they've done that first part. We're now stepping into the phase of how do we assure that we add into the processes with youth coming out of school, that we're doing that initial career counseling with quality in mind. That might be one of the aim things you think about here, as Washington State did in their value-based payment process. The other part that I would suggest is an important piece in implementing and creating measurable skill development is that point in time where Voc Rehab comes back in and does career counseling for individuals that are earning sub-minimum wages in every state. That's another part where, given the Workforce Act, Voc Rehab agencies quickly geared up for how do we just become compliant. Some states have done that really well. Others, because of volumes of individuals that are earning sub-minimum wages, particularly those that fall into the category of intellectual and developmental disabilities, struggled with that. And we're not at a place where there's quality improvement yet in that component. How we measure that is the challenge. Do we see the number of individuals earning sub-minimum wages moving into utilizing Voc Rehab services? Do we see them actually, can we measure how many of them that have been receiving sub-minimum wage move into jobs where they're earning minimum wage or hopefully even better than minimum wage in jobs that they're acquiring? So that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you, Rhea, appreciate that. And this could be for any of you three, and is how many states use managed care organization versus state agencies to manage value-based payments?
So I'll jump in first. Actually, very few states in the IDD space use managed care entities. Value-based payments can occur in either a fee-for-service environment or in a managed care environment. So you needn't feel limited because you're not using that managed care structure. There are still really a handful of states that use managed care for the delivery of long-term services and supports for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And frankly, the states that have gone the furthest so far in the HCBS sphere around VBP have been, it's probably an equal split in some of the, whether it's fee-for-service or managed care. So not sure if the questioner has a follow-up to that, but I would just say, you can conceptualize a value-based payment structure in either a fee-for-service or managed care environment. The contours that you'll eventually land on with how you want to pay and those types of things may influence which Medicaid authorities are going to be good fits for the particular payments. But I'd say that's almost the cart following the horse at a later date as you really put the meat on the bones of what you want to accomplish and how you want to do it. So as my colleagues in Maryland are probably tired of hearing me say, that really design it how you want it to be, and then you can sort of figure out the best fit within the Medicaid sphere for that. So hope that helps.
Thank you, Mary. This one is I think it's for the state, but also you guys can add to this. Is value-based payment the intended way to pay providers in the future? No more fee-for-service payment, or would this be in addition? So I'm gonna respond on behalf of Maryland, and then I'll tell you why we got NASDs here. So we are moving forward to fee-for-service. But we also know that fee-for-service is not an all for all and fits everything that we need to do. And so we were looking at the opportunity to explore value-based payments because our providers came to us and said there's better ways and different ways to do this, especially for the employment services. So for clarity and transparency, we are right now we're not looking at value-based payments for all of our services. We're looking at value-based payments for the employment meaningful day service. I want to make sure that's really clear. And then because there's so many different ways and so many different definitions and so many perspectives, we really wanted to bring the NASD team to help us walk this journey together with you. So Mary, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think just as a testament to the interest, the attendance here is just fabulous. I mean, I think it speaks well to a level of commitment to making sure that the supports and services provided to individuals really result in positive outcomes. And so I do think that there's, again, a lot of different permutations that a value-based payment arrangement can take. And so, again, as you walk the journey, I think some of those methods will become clearer as the best fit for Maryland, the best fit for your provider community, and most importantly, the best fit for the individuals and families you support.
Yeah, I would just add, I think many of us at NASDs are known to say it's not either or, it's both and I think that really applies here.
Well said.
Okay. And then I think we have about another 5 more minutes, but I think folks are wanting to know a lot about time frames, timelines, estimated goals, when we're going to implement this, what does Maryland intend to do? And then people are asking, what happens if the timelines are not what we expect or achieving the goal. And I just want to say on behalf of Maryland and Bernie, if you want to add more to this, but we are not in a rush. We really want to make sure we get it right. We want to make sure that we get feedback from everyone. And a couple of slides after this, I was going to talk a bit about the committee and the work group that we're putting together. It's as you can see, we have over 200-something people. We can't work with 200-something people in a committee, but we do value your input and your feedback. So what we were going to do is put together a work group to look at value-based payments, to look at all the things that Kathleen shared and talked about. And so what I was going to share with you is that we do want full representation. Not only from a provider community, but we want advocates, we want families, we want the regional offices, we want large, small, diversity groups, geographic areas, rural, urban. So we really want to be able to work with a group that really looks at all of those areas, that it has a component of all of that to make sure that we are inclusive. While we can't work with 50 or 60 people, we really want to work with a small group. And then that doesn't mean that there could be other groups that can then talk and bring and come to that larger group. So that's where we're moving for. And I'm answering that because there's a lot of questions to say, how is this going to be selected? Who's going to be selected? What is the process? We're doing it based on interest, and we're also doing it based on need across the state. So we really want people who are participants of those services. We want families who use those services or will be engaging in those services. We want our provider organizations to be a part of that, like Max. We want DOORS or VR system. We want MSDE to be a part of that, because everything it's going to be impacted. So we are not narrowing it down, but we want to make sure that it's a workable committee. So that's where we are. And then there was a comment by a family member here. It's good to have incentives for improving quality, but to implement incentivization, time must pass by to conduct measurements of services. So what happens if after the timeline of measurement has happened, if the goal has not been achieved? And what is the responsibility of the provider at that point? In other words, will there be disincentives for less than satisfactory services? So I don't know, Teja, if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, because I know some states have done that.
Yeah, so those are some of the things that you have to think about in your design. What happens if the goal isn't achieved? There may be a way that you build in where providers have the option to participate or not. Not everybody, may choose to take part in the incentives that are offered. So you've got to think about that as you build the full strategy. Are you going to allow everybody to make the decision about whether to participate or not? And then if they do decide to participate, what if they don't achieve goals? Are there going to be some I hate to say it, but negative consequences? So all of that are the considerations that you have to bring forward as a part of your design process. Mary Reed?
I think we might leave it at that.
Okay.
Okay, and I think people are now just engaged in other things like benefits counseling and people's acuity, and so they're trying to kind of figure out how do you do all of that with the VR system and the state and DDA's requirements as well. So I think that what we really wanted to do today is kind of give you the lay of the land about value-based payments. We wanted to make sure that you had a lot of that information about where DDA is looking at moving towards with the employment services and meaningful day piece of this as it comes to value-based payments. And then, it would be something that we would be creating, and hopefully we can learn from the other states. We are inviting, I think, 4 other states to the table so that you can ask, the committee can ask questions and engage in lessons learned. So I don't know, Mary, if you want to close us out with anything.
Yeah. Well, I think the angle of the questions is just so exciting. I think you're already really showing both enthusiasm and a thoughtfulness on all the different pieces that need to be considered as you move forward. So we're thrilled to support the state as you walk down this path, and know that we'll be in close contact as the groups come together. But just, congratulations. I'm always so heartened when I'm able to be here in Maryland and see just the wonderful thinking. You've already done so many really wonderful things for individuals with disabilities and their families over the past number of years, and building on that with rewarding some of those continued successes is just going to be fantastic. So thank you for including us in your path, and we look forward to the future work together.
Thank you, Mary. Somebody just said, just to make it very clear, make sure that they didn't miss this. Just to make sure that we have an implementation date for the state, and the answer is no, we do not. We are at baby steps. We are exploring, doing environmental scans, seeing where we are, and then we, as Kathleen shared, our goal is to wherever we land, if we land in a place that we're moving in this direction with the blessings of the Deputy Secretary, then we would put it in our waiver renewal, which is about 18 months from now. So if you want to look at a timeline, we're not making any decisions in the next 6 to 12 months, but we'll be working together as a group. If you are interested in participating in this small group of people, and I'm saying small because it's not going to be a large group, it's going to be a working group, please email your interest to Patricia Suzuki. Patricia, Patricia, .S like in Sam, A like in Apple, S like in Sam, T like in Tom, OQUE at Maryland, spell out maryland.gov. Thank you all so very much for, again, your interest and your engagement in today's discussion, and we'll keep you posted. So have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.